Welcome to the 2025 Dialogue, a masterclass series by the HR Association of India. I am Neha Jagnani, and today we are diving into the neuroscience of leadership, decoding how brain science shapes decision making, adaptability, and high impact leadership. Guiding us through this intersection, we have somebody who doesn't just study transformation, she ignites it. Welcoming Harini Sreenivasan. Harini is a curious soul who loves shaking things up. Coming from a family of innovators, engineers, and teachers, she's a unique blend of all. A business transformation consultant, coach, speaker, she's all about self management, agile leadership, and doing things differently. She helps organizations break free from rigid structures and embrace creativity, collaboration, and smart decision making. A nature lover, an environmental advocate, she finds joy in writing, experimenting, and bringing fresh ideas to life. Whether mentoring MBA students, moderating panels, or sparking conversation on LinkedIn, she's always on a mission to inspire change. If it's unconventional, innovative, or just plain fun, chances are she's already exploring it. Harini, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Neha. It's always a pleasure being on the HRAI platform because HRAI, to my mind, has been doing things to ignite change. Been on this platform several times, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be back here. And actually, I'm very fascinated that you chose this topic because this is something that I've been very curiously observing in and out throughout my journey as a consultant, helping leaders change the way they work, helping businesses grow, so on and so forth. So the whole thing about how leaders work, that actually drove me to look at neuroscience, and I'm all the time trying to find out what are the correlations, what do I see, how do I see the principles of neuroscience applying in leadership and their behaviors. And every day is a learning for me. I just walked out of another meeting with a bunch of leaders of an organization, and I was actually reflecting on how my experience there could actually be, it'll be helpful for our conversation right now. So yeah, so I'm actually absolutely glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Harini, for your kind words, and I'm very excited to kickstart this masterclass. So to begin with, my first question to you is, how does one look through the neuroscience lens to identify leaders? And to put it simply, how does one separate good from the great?
What I have noticed is that leadership is something that we take as automatic. Whenever, each one of us has been led by leaders. And when we take up their positions or step into their shoes, we try to emulate what they do. But there's no conscious effort that we try to make, or there's no conscious effort that organizations even do to see, are we making these leaders succeed? There's no conscious effort. It's never there usually.
Right.
So what happens is, it's very difficult for great leaders to emerge out of this when you're doing it in a very organic and a natural way. There can be good leaders, and sometimes some of those leaders who actually are on the path of greatness may emerge as great leaders. Now, looking at it through a neuroscience lens, when you observe, so we do a lot of these fly on the wall observations. We sit through meetings, we look at how leaders behave in those meetings, and we've been through organizations where they are in the midst of crisis, absolute crisis. The leader has to jump in and has to steer the boat. We've been through those situations. Great leaders are those who remain calm even in those crisis situations. Good leaders are those who jump in hands-on and they take the team along with them. They're good leaders, definitely. But great leaders are those who actually have the ability to take a pause even when there is a crisis. They don't jump into the crisis right away. They stay out, they take a pause, they look at how things are going, they try to see where the problems are, where the strengths are, and they try to play on them. Good leaders are hands-on, they jump in, they roll up their sleeves, get into the mud, start working. Good leaders are those who are extremely fantastic in their own comfort zones as leaders. Great leaders are those who push themselves out of those comfort zones even in such situations. So if you look at it, we find a lot of good leaders around us. And I must say that there is no shortage of good leaders. But if you take a step back and look at it carefully, you will be able to pull out a few great leaders. They are attached, but they also learn to remain detached. And they do that beautifully, like dewdrops, or water droplets on a lotus leaf. So a leader who is able to detach themselves from the crisis, but attach themselves good enough to be able to take the people along, they are the great ones.
Fantastic. It's fascinating. Very fine line, right? From good to great, but it shifts your focus from a traditional leadership trait to a more scientific, based trait. So thank you so much for that. Great input. So Harini, my next question is, what does neuroplasticity, how does it play a role in leadership growth and adaptability?
Again, this is a brilliant question, and it's very, very important for all of us to understand. And given the fact that we are doing these sessions for HR folks and not for neuroscientists, I'm trying to keep it as layman language as possible. That's the best way for us to relate and try and adapt, right? So, if you look at the brain is actually a muscle, right? And for every muscle, the way you develop a muscle is when you make it work. So neuroplasticity is actually developing the muscle, also known as the brain, right? So how do you develop muscles in the rest of your body? Is you go to a gym, you work out, you put your muscles to do that extra bit, you push yourself, and then you find that your muscles are well developed.
Right.
Similarly with the brain, right? So if you sit back, look at a situation, you draw patterns, you analyze, you come up with, how do you solve problems? You're actually building the muscle called as your brain. Whereas if you just sit back, relax, and let things go the way they are going, eventually you will find that brain is not developing as a muscle. So as leaders, what happens is when we feel that, okay, it's good to be hands off. A lot of time we are told that, people will solve it themselves. Yeah, fantastic. Don't solve the problem for the people, but be on top of the problem. Because if you delegate to the extent of absolutely letting go and not even being on top of the problem,
Right.
then you're not developing the ability in your own brain to solve the problem. You
Right.
don't have to solve the problem for the people. Everybody is great and they can do it themselves, but it's important for you to be there to support them. So it's very, very necessary for leaders to be on top of the problem, and therefore it's important for leaders to develop the ability of critical thinking, systems thinking, problem solving, and all of this can come only with practice. And neuroplasticity is developing the brain muscle power by so leaders, while they are hands off, they have to be on top of things. So it's not about getting your hands muddy, but it's all about staying on top of things and ensuring that the right people are in the right place and doing the.
Sure. Truly intriguing, Harini. Thank you for that. My next question, Harini, is how can leaders use brain science to make better decisions under pressure?
Okay, so first of all, it's important for leaders to exercise the correct part of their brains. Right? So there is one part of the brain which actually gives a fight or flight kind of a response.
Okay.
There's another part of the brain which thinks ahead. So neuroscientists would know I'm talking about the amygdala, and I'm also talking about the prefrontal cortex. So it's all about exercising the correct part of the brain. If you continue to exercise the amygdala, which actually, creates a fight or flight response, you will have leaders who react to situation. But if the leaders practice exercising the correct part of the brain, which helps them think ahead, they actually consciously detach themselves from the crisis, run a few steps ahead, stand in front of the problem itself, and they look at what can happen differently, what are the various options, and what could be the consequence of each of those options. They jump right there, they make a choice, and then they come back to where they are and they execute that choice. So learning to appreciate that different parts of the brain actually help you react in a different manner. That's something which people ought to know. So that's one thing, practicing neuroscience. Another thing is, leaders should have the ability to to be able to understand from other people's perspective. Okay, so that's again exercising your brain to look at things with empathy. Because what really fascinated me about neuroscience many years back is that the brain is an organ which has, I would say it has a life, it has a, what do you say, a persona of its own. So when I'm looking at something with my eyes, the brain is making a perception and building a story. When I'm listening to something with my ears, the brain is taking those signals and making a story around it. So all the time, my brain, or every human brain is all the time making judgments that this is how it is, this is
Right.
how it is, and this is how it is. So what happens is when we listen to people, even then our brain is constantly making judgments about what they're saying. We are not listening non-judgmentally. So I think when leaders understand and appreciate neuroscience and how the brain works, they will be in a position to put themselves, in the shoes of the person who's speaking, hear it as they say it, and instead of saying this is how it is, they would be in a position to say this is how I see it. So you see the shift happening from a rigid opinion to a perspective. Opinion is a lot more judgmental. A perspective is more about this is how I see it. Tell me more, right? So I think that's what it is. Being able to exercise the correct part of the brain, go right ahead in front of the problem, look at options, analyze, come back and execute, and look at things with empathy. Another thing where the brain plays a huge role is in the ability to trust people. There is one brain chemical which is actually about trusting people, and when that brain chemical is released, the leaders begin to trust ability of people. It's when we talk of trust, it's not only about trusting an individual from an integrity perspective.
Right.
Trust is blindly believing that this person is someone who has his own thinking, who has his or her own thinking, and has the ability to execute or deliver the job that is required.
Right.
So it's important to release those brain chemicals so that you build an atmosphere of trust, because it's all entirely in the hands of the leader to build an environment of trust. It's you cannot have a trusting culture unless the leader demonstrates that. The culture starts from the top. So it's about the leaders learning to run ahead of the problem, uh, to run into the shoes of people whom he or she is working with, and also trust in the ability of the. And here is where you're exercising the right parts of your brain to make it really active.
Oh, truly very well articulated. So, Harini, to summarize, the first thing was to refrain from reacting, to be able to think forward. Then there was empathy. Then there was differentiating from making an opinion to developing a perspective about something. And then lastly, as you said, building trust and trusting people around you to create that ecosystem around you. And it will eventually kind of enhance your leadership. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
My next question, Harini, is what neuroscience-based techniques can help leaders to build more trusts and high-performing teams?
Interesting. There are many techniques one can come across, but let me keep it very simple. Okay. More than techniques, I think what people around you will understand is what are those behaviors of yours where you are actually demonstrating that you trust them. So, for example, the way you ask questions or the way a leader asks questions to people could be changed. So instead of asking people, okay, here is a problem, this is what we want to solve. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, because I think this is what you do best. This is one way of delegation, and it's a very traditional way of delegation. Now, if I'm a team member, how would I look at it? Oh, I've been given this job and my colleague has been given that task because I think my leader feels he or she will do a better job than me. That's a perception, absolutely. That may not be the leader's intention at all, but when I see a distribution happening in front of my eyes, I start suspecting and I look at my leader with a feeling of distrust. And the leader also here is demonstrating that, yeah, I know what is best, so let me allocate work and I don't want you to volunteer. Now, if a leader operates from a position of trust, he or she could do it differently. They could say, okay, here is an outcome that we want to achieve as a team. These are the tasks, and who would want to volunteer? Now, obviously, when a team member volunteers, he or she would not want to set themselves up for failure. So they will definitely volunteer for a task that they're good at or a task that they want to do, or both. Of course, the leader is accountable for the outcome. So the leader has to definitely take a pause and have a conversation saying, okay, you have volunteered to do this. Can we have a conversation on what's your plan? How are we going to do it? And be assured, do all kinds of due diligence to check if this person is ready to do it. Lend your support, but nevertheless, hear the person out. And this is a demonstration of trust. Even when leaders do reviews, project reviews, many a time we find them asking, what's the status? Tell me what all tasks have been completed. And they run through a detailed task list. Now, this puts a feeling of distrust in people's minds, feeling that, okay, here is a review and there will be a consequence to that review. When tasks and status update of tasks are done, it feels like you are being reviewed as an individual. Instead, a leader could demonstrate trust in that conversation by saying, okay, this was the outcome that we all agreed on. Where are we on that? So it's not checking with an individual on what tasks have been completed, but it's about checking where are we on the outcome. And then obviously everybody will want to chip in and respond to it depending on what they have accomplished. So several ways of demonstrating trust in the way in so questioning techniques, using positive sounding questions, appreciative inquiry. These are all techniques where trusted behavior can be demonstrated. Looking at empathy, right? For empathy, I normally suggest to people to use an empathy map conversation when they are talking to individuals. So when you're asking somebody for, let's say, you want to know what is their uppermost challenge that they are facing in a particular project. Instead of asking them, what's the challenge you're facing? It'll be great to ask the person, what do you feel you're going through? What is it that you're hearing that's happening around you? What are those emotions that you're feeling when you're going through this project? Ask them a lot of see, feel, do, think. What do you think you can do differently, right? So with this, you're actually being non-judgmental and you're asking the person to walk you through their feelings. And that's a demonstration of empathy. So, building a culture of trust and empathy using these very simple techniques, appreciative inquiry, empathy map conversations, asking for, outcomes, where are we on the outcomes, and not tracking down individual tasks. These are some very small techniques leaders can do to ensure that they're building a trust-based culture in their organization. So it's, one can go on and on and on about this. I'm a little conscious of time as well. Definitely building a culture of trust starts with the leader. And one thing I must say is that it's very important for leaders to be consistent with this demonstration of this behavior. Because trust it's very fragile. It takes a lot of effort to build trust. It stays, but it actually takes a lot of effort to stay that, to maintain it as well. So it's very easy for trust to crumble down. With any single instance of moving away from that behavior can make people feel that they are distrusted. So it's very, very important for a leader to be authentic and consistent in demonstrating the trust they have in their people. And consistency has to be everywhere in thoughts, words, and in actions. If you're writing an email, it should, trust should be jumping out of that email. When you're drafting a policy, trust should be jumping out of that policy. When you're having a conversation with people, you should demonstrate trust. Even when you're having difficult conversations, you demonstrate trust. Even when you're telling somebody that, you've been asked to go, non-performance, whatever. If there is transparency in that conversation, that person feels that you trusted that individual, but they're not a real fit to the role that they are. So the key here is for a leader to be absolutely consistent in what they're doing, and not do it once, then maybe at some other time I have an absolutely different behavior. At one moment I'm demonstrating trust, another moment I'm being a control freak. That won't work because it's very, very easy for trust to break. It's extremely fragile. So being consistent each time, every time is super important.
Sure. Thank you so much. So many takeaways from that, Harini. So we can safely say that trust and performance actually go hand in hand. And the whole point about empathy map was truly intriguing. And of course, to end with, consistency is the key to create an ecosystem that is built on trust. So very important point. Thank you so much. So this brings us to the last question, Harini, for today, which is, how does understanding dopamine and other neurotransmitters can enhance motivation and innovation in teams?
Okay, simple. Again, I'm deliberately keeping it for the layperson. If I talk about all the neurotransmitters and the brain chemicals, it might not be relatable. So let me keep it very simple and straight. Uh, the brain constantly releases a lot of chemicals which drive our emotions, which drive our behavior. So there are some chemicals which you talk about good things that a person has done. It releases a chemical which drives motivation. So building a culture of appreciation, it motivates people. All right. So use that brain chemical a lot. Build a culture of appreciation, and of course, appreciation should not be superficial, on the top, and flaky. It has to be concrete, objective. The more objective an appreciation is, the better it is. It keeps that motivation running for a long time.
Right.
Similarly, there are other brain chemicals which actually create an emotion of trust. So, like I said, if you're demonstrating trust in the organization, if you're demonstrating trust in your behavior, that brain chemical gets activated. Similarly, there are other methods which actually build a lot of the neuron network in your brain. So when it comes to problem solving, if the leader is able to bifurcate the problem from the solution that they have in their own minds, and they're able to present only the problem to the team, and they're able to navigate through each of their team members, asking for what they think about the problem, it builds in them the ability to solve complex problems. And when it comes to decision making, if the leader is able, again, motivating somebody, releasing the chemical, releasing dopamine for motivation, and then releasing the brain chemical for trust, it helps people to take decisions on behalf of the leader. So many a time you will notice that great leaders are one who are inclusive in their decision making. When I talk of inclusivity here, I'm not talking of the DEI. I'm talking of being inclusive when it comes to taking decisions. Because we're trained in a way that you're a leader, so decisions have to be taken by you. But I think it's important for us to flip it down. Like you mentioned, I have a habit of turning things upside down and looking at it. Actually, the best decisions are taken by people who are actually in the problem. So taking a cue from that, I think it's important for leaders to be able to, release those chemicals in the brain through motivation and trust, and which help the team members to take their own decisions.
Fascinating. That is truly how brain chemistry can actually influence, how a leader can transform things in many ways. So thank you so much, Harini. This brings us to the end of the masterclass, and it was my pleasure to host you today. Some great perspectives and drawing the intersection between neuroscience and leadership. It certainly gave me a deeper understanding on the subject. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Neha. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Looking forward to many more conversations on this fascinating subject.
Absolutely. I'll just have a quick note to our audiences. Thank you for tuning into this masterclass. We hope you got some takeaways and perspectives to think about. Until we meet next time, keep learning and innovating. Thank you. Thank you, Harini.